Imagine a map, not the kind you find in a school textbook, but the kind that was drawn by hand on calfskin vellum by a man who had sailed to the edges of everything that was known. Now imagine zooming into that map, past the coastlines of West Africa, past the trade routes cutting through the Caribbean, past the Spanish Main and into the open Atlantic, where the lines stop and the cartographer simply wrote in small Latin script, "Here be dangers." Now picture a ship crossing that blank space. A three-masted vessel with 80 men aboard, creaking through 6-foot swells under a sky that hasn't shown the sun in 4 days. On the quarterdeck stands the captain, telescope in hand, scanning the horizon. He looks like the man in charge. He carries the title. Every port knows his name. But below deck, sitting at a table with a ledger, a pistol, and the only key to the weapons locker is another man entirely. He doesn't wear a finer coat. He doesn't bark orders from the rail. Most of the crew wouldn't even call him sir. And yet, this man, the quartermaster, holds more actual power than the captain ever will. He controls the food, he distributes the plunder, he settles every dispute. He can, at any moment, call a vote to remove the captain from command. And if the vote passes, the captain is finished. Not demoted, finished. Put off the ship at the next port, with nothing but the clothes on his back. This is the story that maritime history has quietly buried for over 200 years. Not because it isn't documented, it is. In Admiralty trial records, in captured ship articles, in the personal journals of men who served. The evidence is everywhere. And yet the dominant narrative of the sea, the one taught in every classroom and repeated in every film, tells you that the captain was an absolute monarch, that his word was law, that the ship was a floating dictatorship. It wasn't. And the man who proved that, every single day, was the quartermaster. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what a ship actually was. Not in the romantic sense, not the adventure story, what it was in practical, structural terms. A ship was a self-contained world. Once it left port, there was no government, no court, no police force, no external authority of any kind. The nearest thing to civilization might be 3,000 miles of open water in every direction. That means every ship had to solve a problem that human beings have been trying to solve for thousands of years. How do you organize a group of people, give them rules, distribute resources fairly, and prevent one person from seizing total control? Philosophers have written entire libraries trying to answer that question. Plato tried, Aristotle tried, Locke, Hobbes, Montesquieu, Rousseau, all of them spent their careers wrestling with the problem of governance. And while they were writing theory, sailors were building practice, real, functional systems of self-governance that worked under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Not in comfortable drawing rooms, not in parliamentary chambers. On wooden ships in the middle of the Atlantic, surrounded by men who carried knives and had very little patience for bad leadership. The system they built was remarkable. And at its center, holding the entire thing together, was the quartermaster. Here's what most people think they know about how ships worked. The captain gave orders, the crew followed them. If you disobeyed, you were punished, flogged maybe, keel-hauled if it was bad enough, thrown in the brig. The captain's authority was total and unchallengeable, like a king on a floating kingdom. And that version of the story is partially true, but only for one type of ship: naval vessels, Royal Navy ships, Spanish Armada galleons, French men of war. On those ships, yes, the captain was appointed by the crown. His authority came from the state. Disobeying him was the same as disobeying the king, and the penalties were brutal. But naval ships were not the only ships on the ocean, not even close. For every Royal Navy frigate patrolling the Caribbean, there were dozens of merchant vessels, privateers, and independent ships operating under a completely different set of rules. And on those ships, the power structure looked nothing like the naval model. On a privateer or an independent vessel, the captain was elected, chosen by the crew through a direct vote. He served at their pleasure, and he could be removed at any time through another vote. He did not inherit his position. He did not buy it. He did not receive it from a king or an admiral. He earned it, and he kept it only as long as the crew believed he was the right man for the job. But even that doesn't capture the full picture, because the captain's authority, even after being elected, was limited, severely limited. During battle, yes, the captain had absolute command. When cannons were firing and the ship was maneuvering against an enemy, you needed one voice making fast decisions. No one disputed that. But in every other moment, the captain's power was checked by one man, the quartermaster. The quartermaster was also elected by the crew through the same democratic vote, and his role was specifically designed to prevent the captain from becoming a tyrant. Think of it as a constitutional system. The captain was the executive. The quartermaster was everything else. The legislature, the judiciary, and the treasury all rolled into one person. Here's what the quartermaster actually controlled on a daily basis: food and water. The quartermaster decided how rations were distributed, how much each man received. Before we go any further, I need to stop for a second, because what I've been showing you in these videos only scratches the surface. And I realized at some point that the full picture, the actual pirate code, word for word, the real punishment records, the exact treasure division shares, the ports that secretly funded them, it doesn't fit in a video. I put it all into one document, the Black Flag Codex. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now, let's keep going. When meals were served, if supplies were running low, the quartermaster decided who got cut first and by how much. On a ship where starvation was a real possibility, controlling the food supply was controlling life itself. Plunder. When a prize was taken, the quartermaster divided the spoils, not the captain, the quartermaster. He determined each man's share according to the articles they had all signed before the voyage. The captain received a larger share, typically 1.5 to 2 shares, compared to a common sailor's 1 share, but the ratio was fixed. The captain couldn't simply take what he wanted. The quartermaster enforced the agreed-upon distribution, and if the captain tried to cheat, the quartermaster had the authority to call a vote to remove him. Disputes. Every argument between crew members, every accusation of theft, every complaint about unfair treatment went to the quartermaster, not the captain. The quartermaster heard both sides, made a ruling, and enforced it. He was the judge and the jury. In some cases, if the offense was serious enough, he would call a general assembly of the crew and let them vote on the punishment. Weapons. The quartermaster held the key to the arms locker. The muskets, the pistols, the cutlasses, the powder, all of it was under his control. He distributed weapons before battle and collected them afterward. This wasn't a minor detail. On a ship full of armed men with strong opinions and short tempers, controlling access to weapons was the single most important security measure available: living quarters. The quartermaster assigned sleeping spaces, decided who bunked where, and settled arguments about territory. On a crowded ship, where men slept in shifts and personal space was measured in inches, this was a constant source of tension. The quartermaster managed it. Discipline. If a crew member needed to be punished for a minor offense, the quartermaster handled it. Not the captain. The captain could recommend punishment, but the quartermaster decided whether it was warranted and what form it would take. For major offenses, the entire crew voted, but for the day-to-day business of keeping order, the quartermaster was the law. Add all of that up: food, money, justice, weapons, living space. Discipline. The quartermaster controlled every single resource and system that mattered to the daily lives of the crew. The captain controlled the sails and the course. During battle, he controlled tactics. But in every other moment, the most powerful man on the ship was not the man with the telescope on the quarterdeck. It was the man with the ledger below deck. Now, if you've never heard any of this before, that's not your fault. Maritime history, as it's commonly taught, focuses almost exclusively on naval tradition. The Royal Navy model, The Admiralty system, captains appointed by kings, operating under crown authority, enforcing discipline through the lash and the noose. That's the version of maritime history that survived, because that's the version that served the interests of the states that wrote the history books. The democratic systems that existed on privateers and independent vessels were not just ignored, they were actively suppressed. And the reason is not complicated. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the major European powers were monarchies. England had a king. France had a king. Spain had a king. The idea that a group of men on a ship could elect their own leader, distribute resources equitably, and operate under a written constitution that everyone had signed voluntarily, that idea was dangerous. Not dangerous to the ships, dangerous to the thrones. Think about the timeline. The Mayflower Compact was signed in 1620. The English Bill of Rights was enacted in 1689. John Locke published his Two Treatises of Government in 1689. The American Declaration of Independence was written in 1776. The French Declaration of the Rights of Man was adopted in 1789. But ship articles, the written constitutions that governed life aboard independent vessels, predate all of those documents. Some of the earliest surviving examples date to the late 1500s. By the mid-1600s, the practice of writing and signing articles before a voyage was widespread and well established. These articles were not informal agreements. They were detailed, specific, legally structured documents. They specified the share of plunder each rank would receive. They laid out rules of conduct. They established penalties for specific offenses, everything from desertion to fighting aboard ship to dereliction of duty during battle. They defined the process for electing and removing officers. They guaranteed compensation for injuries, specifying exact amounts for the loss of a right arm versus a left arm, a leg versus an eye, and every single man aboard signed them, voluntarily, before the ship left port. If you didn't agree to the articles, you didn't sail. No one was forced, no one was pressed into service. The articles were a social contract in the most literal sense of the term, and at the center of enforcing that contract, every single day, was the quartermaster. Let's look at some specific examples. Because this isn't speculation. These are documented cases drawn from Admiralty trial records, ship logs, and contemporary accounts. Bartholomew Roberts, known to history as Black Bart, commanded one of the most successful independent fleets of the early 1700s. His ships operated under a set of articles that were captured by the Royal Navy and preserved in Admiralty records. Those articles are among the most detailed surviving examples of ship constitutions. Article 1 stated that every man had a vote in affairs of moment. Every man, regardless of rank, regardless of how long he had been aboard, one man, one vote. That's a level of democratic participation that most European countries wouldn't achieve for another 150 years. Article 2 specified the distribution of plunder. The captain received 2 shares. The quartermaster received 1 3/4 shares. The master gunner, boatswain, and sailing master received 1.5 shares. All other men received 1 share each. The ratios were fixed, public, and non-negotiable. No one received a disproportionate cut. No one could hoard. Article 3 addressed injury compensation. A man who lost a right arm in service received 600 pieces of 8, or 6 slaves. A left arm was worth 500, a right leg 500, a left leg 400. Loss of an eye or a finger was compensated at 100 pieces of 8. These amounts were guaranteed by the articles and enforced by the quartermaster. The quartermaster aboard Robert's ship was a man named Thomas Anstis, and Anstis wielded enormous influence. When disputes arose over division of captured cargo, Anstis made the ruling. When men complained about duty assignments, Anstis adjudicated. When 2 crew members came to blows over a personal grievance, Anstis determined fault and assigned punishment. Roberts himself acknowledged the limits of his own authority. During one documented dispute, when the crew disagreed about their next destination, Roberts reportedly said that his power extended only to moments of chase or battle. In all other matters, the crew decided. And the man who facilitated that decision-making process, who organized the vote, who enforced the outcome, was the Quartermaster. Roberts was not unique. Stop for a second. What you just heard about the pirate code is the part that rewrites everything you thought you knew. But it only lands when you see the actual shares, the exact fractions written into the Articles of Agreement, the punishments, the port records, the names of the men who funded them from government offices. It's all in the Black Flag Codex, linked in the description. 5 seconds. Grab it now, because what comes next builds directly on it. Link is below. QR code is on your screen. Edward England, who operated in the Indian Ocean in the early 1700s, had a quartermaster who effectively overruled him on a critical strategic decision. England wanted to release a captured ship unharmed. His quartermaster argued that releasing the ship posed a security risk. The crew voted. The quartermaster's position won. England was overruled on his own ship. The incident didn't end there. England's repeated disagreements with his quartermaster led to a vote to remove him from command entirely. He was deposed, marooned on an island with limited supplies, and replaced by a new captain. The quartermaster remained in his position. The captain was disposable. The quartermaster was essential. This pattern repeated across dozens of documented cases. Without a quartermaster, there was no system, no distribution, no justice, no order. Consider what this means in the broader context of governance. These ships had solved a problem that political philosophers were still theorizing about. They had created a functional separation of powers. The captain held executive authority in specific, limited circumstances. The quartermaster held administrative, judicial, and economic authority in all other circumstances. And the crew held ultimate sovereign power through the vote. That's not anarchy. That's a structured constitutional system with checks and balances, operating under a written charter. The fact that this system emerged organically from the practical needs of men living in extreme conditions rather than from the theories of political philosophers makes it more remarkable, not less. And yet this system has been almost completely erased from the mainstream understanding of maritime history. Ask anyone to describe the power structure on a historical ship, and they will describe the naval model. Captain at the top, officers below him, crew at the bottom. Rigid hierarchy. Absolute authority. That's the model that survived in the popular imagination. And it survived because it was the model that reinforced the political structures of the states that controlled the narrative. The democratic model was buried. Not because it failed. It didn't fail. It operated successfully for over a century, across hundreds of ships, involving tens of thousands of men. It was buried because it was inconvenient, because it proved that ordinary men, without noble birth, without formal education, without the blessing of any crown, could govern themselves effectively under the most demanding conditions imaginable. There's another layer to this that often gets overlooked. The quartermaster system didn't just distribute power, it distributed information. And in any system of governance, information is power. On a naval vessel, the captain controlled all intelligence, charts, enemy positions, supply data. Common sailors knew only what they were told, which was usually nothing. On a ship with a quartermaster system, information flowed differently. The quartermaster kept the ship's accounts open to inspection. Any crew member could review the ledger, check how plunder had been divided, verify that the articles were being honored. Transparency wasn't just encouraged, it was mandatory. Because the quartermaster's legitimacy depended on the crew's trust, and trust required transparency. The crew were not passive subjects following orders. They were active participants in their own governance, making decisions based on real information. When they voted to change course, they did so with knowledge of food supplies and tactical considerations. When they voted to remove a captain, they did so with a clear understanding of his record. Democracy without information is theater. Democracy with information is governance. and the quartermaster was the one who made that distinction real. Let's talk about the economic implications, because this is where the story gets even more interesting. In a naval system, prize money was distributed with enormous ratios between top and bottom. A Royal Navy captain might receive 1/4 of the total value of a captured prize. His officers would split another quarter, and the remaining half would be divided among the entire crew, which might number 200 men or more. A common sailor's share might be less than 1% of the captain's. Under the quartermaster system, the ratios were radically compressed. The captain received 2 shares. The quartermaster, 1 3/4 skilled positions, 1 1/2. Everyone else, 1 share. The maximum ratio between highest and lowest was 2 to 1, 2 to 1. In a system that predated organized labor movements by 2 centuries, these men had independently developed an economic distribution model that was more equitable than most systems operating today. And the man who enforced that equity, who prevented the captain from skimming, who ensured every man received his contractual share, was the quartermaster. If a prize was taken and the captain attempted to claim more than the articles permitted, the quartermaster called a vote. If the vote went against the captain, he either complied or was removed. There was no appeal. The crew was sovereign, the articles were the Constitution, and the quartermaster was the guardian of both. Now, the question that naturally follows all of this is, why don't we know this? Why isn't the quartermaster system taught in schools alongside Magna Carta and the Mayflower Compact? Why is the democratic tradition of independent seafarers treated as a footnote, if it's mentioned at all? Part of the answer is simply that history is written by the victors. The navies of England, France, and Spain eventually dominated the seas. Their institutional model, the hierarchical command structure with authority flowing from the crown, became the standard. The democratic model was marginalized, and the men who practiced it were, in most historical accounts, reduced to criminals, outlaws, and rogues. Their political achievements were dismissed, their economic innovations were ignored, their constitutional documents were filed away in admiralty archives and forgotten. But there's a deeper reason, and it has to do with what the quartermaster system implied about human nature. The dominant political theory of the 17th and 18th centuries, the theory that justified monarchy and aristocracy, rested on a fundamental assumption that ordinary people could not govern themselves. That without a strong, divinely appointed authority at the top, society would collapse into chaos. That hierarchy was natural, inevitable, and necessary. The quartermaster system proved the opposite. It proved that a group of men, many of them illiterate, many of them from the lowest social classes, could create and operate a sophisticated system of self-governance. They could write constitutions. They could hold elections. They could distribute resources fairly. They could resolve disputes peacefully. They could limit the power of their leaders and hold them accountable. They could do everything that the political theorists of their era said they couldn't do. And they did it under conditions far more demanding than anything faced by the parliaments of Europe. That's a dangerous story. Not dangerous to the men on the ships, dangerous to the men on the thrones. There's one more aspect of the quartermaster's role that deserves attention, and it connects directly to how we understand old maps and old systems that seem to have been deliberately obscured. The quartermaster was also, in many cases, the navigator, or at the very least, the keeper of navigational records. He maintained the ship's log. He tracked positions, distances, and routes. He knew where the ship had been and where it was going. On some vessels, the quartermaster was the only man aboard other than the captain who could read charts and use navigational instruments. This matters because navigational knowledge was, in this era, one of the most closely guarded categories of information in the world. The Portuguese crown classified its maritime charts as state secrets. The Spanish Casa de Contratación maintained a master chart, the Padrón Real, that was updated continuously and never allowed out of Seville. The English and Dutch did the same. Accurate knowledge of coastlines, currents, wind patterns, and harbor depths was strategic intelligence of the highest order. And quartermasters had it. They had direct, first-hand knowledge of routes and locations that the great powers were spending fortunes to keep secret. They knew which charts were accurate and which were deliberately falsified to mislead competitors. They knew where the blank spaces on official maps were actually filled with islands, harbors, and passages that the mapmakers had been ordered to omit. When these ships were captured and their crews tried in admiralty courts, the quartermasters' logs and charts were among the most sought-after pieces of evidence. Not because they proved crimes, because they contained information, routes, locations, depths, passages, knowledge that the colonial powers wanted for themselves and wanted no one else to have. After the trials, those logs and charts were confiscated. Some were incorporated into official navigation records. Many were simply destroyed. The knowledge the quartermasters had accumulated through years of direct observation was absorbed into institutional systems and erased from the public record. Think about what we're actually looking at here. A system of governance that was more democratic than any contemporary European state. An economic distribution model more equitable than most modern corporations. A constitutional tradition that predated the Enlightenment's greatest political documents. A navigational knowledge base compiled through direct experience rather than institutional cartography. All of it organized, maintained, and protected by one man, the quartermaster. And all of it systematically removed from the dominant historical narrative. Not because it was unimportant, because it was too important. Because it demonstrated capabilities and possibilities that the ruling powers of the era did not want demonstrated. Because it proved that the systems being imposed from above, the hierarchies, the rigid class structures, the concentrations of power and wealth, were not natural laws. They were choices. And alternative choices were not only possible, but had been tested and proven to work. The next time you see an old map, one of those beautiful hand-drawn charts with their compass roses and their sea monsters and their blank spaces marked with warnings, remember that those maps were political documents as much as navigational ones. What they showed was approved. What they omitted was deliberate. And the men who knew the difference, who had sailed into the blank spaces and come back with knowledge that contradicted the official version, were the quartermasters. They kept the real records. They held the real power. And when the institutions caught up with them, the records were taken, the power was redistributed upward, and the story was rewritten to make it seem as though the captain had always been in charge. He hadn't. The man with the ledger was always more powerful than the man with the telescope. The man who fed the crew was always more essential than the man who chose the course. The man who enforced fairness was always more trusted than the man who commanded obedience. The quartermaster was the most important person on any ship, and the fact that you probably never learned that in school tells you everything you need to know about who wrote the history and what they wanted you to believe. Some of the old records survive, scattered across Admiralty archives in London, in the Archivo General de Indias in Seville, in Dutch colonial records in The Hague, fragments of ship articles, partial logs, trial transcripts where quartermasters were questioned under oath about their roles. The evidence is there, sitting in folders and boxes, waiting for someone to assemble it into the story it was always meant to tell. But these findings have not penetrated the popular understanding of history. The textbooks still teach the naval model. The films still show the captain as absolute ruler. And the quartermaster, the man who actually ran the ship, who actually held the power, who actually made the system work, remains invisible. There's a pattern in history that repeats across cultures and centuries. Systems of distributed power are created by ordinary people. Those systems work. They provide for their members, resolve disputes, and adapt to changing conditions. And then, centralized authority notices and centralizes. The commons were enclosed. The guilds were broken. The cooperative traditions of indigenous peoples were dismantled. and the democratic maritime systems governed by the quartermaster were criminalized, suppressed, and written out of the record. What remains is the version that justifies concentration. Power concentrated, wealth concentrated, knowledge concentrated, the captain model, the king model, the model where one person at the top makes the decisions and everyone else follows. But the quartermaster model existed. It worked. And the evidence is still there, buried in archives and trial records and confiscated logs for anyone willing to look. The man with more power than the captain wasn't a revolutionary. He wasn't a philosopher. He wasn't trying to change the world. He was just trying to run a fair ship, keep the crew fed, divide the shares honestly, settle arguments before they turned into knife fights, make sure no one man, not even the captain, could take more than his due. He was doing the simplest, most fundamental work of governance, and he was doing it better than the empires that eventually destroyed him. That's the story they didn't teach you. The most powerful man on any ship in the age of sail was not the captain. It was the quartermaster. And the reason you never heard his name is the same reason you never heard a lot of names. Because the people who write the history books have always preferred kings to quartermasters, and the quartermasters have always known that.